If 90% of software development teams are using the Agile method for software development, why would anybody in their right mind consider even using a waterfall method? Makes no sense. The truth is a little bit more complicated. This isn't Tesla from today versus the Model T in the 1910 to 1920 era. This is a little bit more complicated. Both of the methods shine in certain ways for development of software, but both the methods also fail in certain ways. So I'm going to explain how you can combine these two together and come up with something that's better. I got to ignore my screen here. There we go. So when you are developing a medical device software, so software as a medical device, there are a few myths that people have, and I want to dispel those first. Number one, people believe that waterfall is required for regulatory projects. Anything that's regulated as a medical device, we have to use waterfall. Why? Because the design control guidance document has a waterfall diagram on it. That's just one method they recommend, and it has a lot to do with when they recommend it. It was 1996 when they published that guidance document. So a little bit before Agile even existed. The Agile Manifesto, I'll put a link down below later, but the Agile Manifesto, we're talking about, I think, 2001. So before that, that's part of the reason why you're not going to find it. Number two, you can't proceed to the next step of your process development or product development when you're developing software until you finish all the tasks that were in the previous phase. So first of all, there's nothing that says you have to have phases. There's nothing that says you have to have a hard gate. There are certain documents that have to be submitted to the FDA, but you could have the whole thing be one big phase. There's nothing wrong with that. But because the waterfall had very specific, rigid, structured phases and gates, and you weren't supposed to go to the next phase until you'd finished all the tasks from the previous, people have the belief that this myth is true. It's not. In fact, from a regulatory standpoint, you're only required to have one design review at the end when you release the product. So there are a lot of myths related to that. Number three, you have to perform a detailed impact analysis for every change you make. No. So if you already have the product on the market and you make a design change, we call this a production change control process. We have a design change control process. We have our production change control process. And if you are doing this after the product's already in production, you have to have much more rigid design controls. And you have to do that impact analysis. But when you're in development, before the product's been released, before it's even been submitted to the FDA, you can have much more relaxed design controls for those changes. In fact, you just have to document those changes. So if you document the change, that's enough. How detailed? Doesn't say anywhere. How many people have to approve it? Doesn't say anywhere. Could be the author and the team lead. Good enough for me. But once you get into production and you've already cleared it with the FDA, now you have to follow FDA guidance. You have a much more rigorous control process. So that's a myth. Next, Agile is unstructured. Now, I will argue to anybody, and I know all the Scrum Masters out there would agree with me, it is a very rigorous, structured process. You're supposed to have daily scrums. You're supposed to have sprint reviews. You're supposed to have retrospectives. You're supposed to be doing some pre-planning up front and making sure your backlog is well defined. You rank order your backlog. You have meetings with stakeholders and get their feedback on it. There's training for this. There's certifications for this. How can that be called unstructured? I would say that we have just as much training out there available in certification for Scrum and Agile as we have for traditional project management tools like Gantt charts, whatever it is. So you can't say it's less structured, it's just different. So that's a myth. And then documentation of everything is required, and that slows down the project. Now, there are 10 required documents that you have to attach. In one of those, the risk management file, that's probably multiple documents. They say specifically a plan, a risk analysis for the software, and your risk management report. So it should be 3, so you're up to 12 documents. And they have a little blue box that you're supposed to attach to each one. Now, you could put it all into one document, and you could attach something that says, go see this section of the other document in your submission. But you need those 12 documents somewhere in your submission in order to even submit it to the FDA. So you do need those. But that is different from you have to document everything. And it doesn't have to slow down the project. People have design reviews. You have a team of people. Most of the time, people are working remote. If not all the people are working remote. And you're using Zoom or you're using Teams, and somebody hits record, and somebody's got Otter, and somebody's got Firefly, and somebody's got Read AI. We seem to have more note takers attending the meetings than we have people attending the meetings. So I'm pretty sure we can document it without a lot of extra effort, so it shouldn't slow anything down. Maybe what we should do is, from now on, when we're programming things, we're a developer and we're programming, maybe we should actually record ourselves and use ChatGPT, or we should use Read AI, or we should use Otter, or something else to transcribe and document the work that we're doing instead of typing it all out. And we can just edit, simplify and edit, take out the extra stuff we don't need, so it's just the core stuff that you do need. It doesn't take long to delete. Nobody says it has to be publication worthy, but there's a difference between doing nothing and having it automatically document what I say to myself in front of my computer while I'm typing away. So we can document a lot of this stuff in a more efficient way. So those are all myths. Okay, now let's get on to characteristics of both methods. So, and they're almost exactly opposite of one another. So as I go through this, you're going to hear almost exact opposite things. Waterfall is linear. Agile, cyclical, and iterative. Now, in reality, you're probably doing iterative development no matter what until you get to the testing phase, and then it's probably a little bit more linear unless you fail a test, and now we're back to cyclical again. So waterfall is linear, agile is cyclical and iterative, but truth of the matter is your development's probably very cyclical and iterative, and then the regulatory review process is very linear. Next, extensive documentation for waterfall, minimal documentation for agile. Well, you still have to submit the same 12 documents to the FDA either way. So whether you produce them during the agile cycle or you produce it afterwards, you throw it over the wall and give it to the regulatory person, you still need it. It would be more efficient to create it while you're actually developing the software rather than touching it twice. I'm going to do all this typing, create my code, and then I'm going to go over here and have somebody else that's completely unrelated do documentation. That's not efficient. Even you going back and trying to remember what you did even a month ago is really hard. I can barely remember sometimes what I did for breakfast. So create your documentation real time, use automated tools, make it more efficient, create the documentation, then edit it, delete stuff that's unnecessary, but you still need the same 12 documents. So I'm going to say no dice on either one of those. It's not extensive, it's not minimal, it's what the FDA requires. Why would anybody do more than what they require? Limited flexibility for waterfall, adaptive for agile. I would say anybody that's not doing an adaptive process and is not comfortable with changes at the last minute, they're being unrealistic. Stakeholders, your boss, whoever it is, somebody's going to come up with a last minute change and you're going to deal with it. That's essentially a core principle in Agile. Embrace it. So yes, I would say waterfall doesn't adapt well to flexibility and adapting to changes. And it's difficult. So that's one of the definite downsides of waterfall. And I would definitely say that's a characteristic of it. Agile is much better at that. So that's sort of a tick for why people are using Agile in the first place. But that's definitely a characteristic. And then we have minimal customer involvement in waterfall and extensive customer involvement in Agile. So this is really a when thing. Waterfall, you typically get a lot of customer input, and it's really customer input at the very beginning. You might get regulatory input, you might do a pre-sub, but it's at the beginning of the project when you're developing your requirements. Once you've got your requirements, they tend not to get feedback until the very end. Agile has sprint reviews on a regular basis and gets stakeholder feedback. I would say the one area that Agile is weak in is getting feedback from other stakeholders other than customers. Excellent when it comes to getting customer feedback, not so great when it comes to regulatory feedback or other things that are outside of the customer realm. So think a little bit more broadly into, instead of using the word customer, think stakeholder. So that's another characteristic of the two that is definitely different, and it's probably a much better approach to go after the Agile method. But I wouldn't say that Waterfall has no feedback. They have minimal customer involvement at later stages, and it's mostly on the front end when you're developing the requirements, instead of Agile where you're getting them constantly, and is a much better approach. Now, why did the regulators choose Waterfall? Part of it was timing, but the other part of it is they like to have plan, requirements, and then very clear, extensive documentation, if you want to use that term. Agile doesn't quite work that way, and it didn't exist at that time. So maybe the better approach here is Agile for developing software, but we have to come up with something that's going to satisfy the regulators. And 2023, 2025 guidance from the FDA on cybersecurity hasn't changed. The 2023 guidance on software hasn't changed. They want that documentation. They're being very specific about what they want, what format they want it on, what content should be there. You need to provide that. There's not an option. So now we're going to get into the benefits of Agile. So team members can specialize. This is a unique characteristic. When you have Agile teams, you tend to have a very small team of developers. You have a product owner, and you have a Scrum Master. And this is specific to the Scrum methodology. Some companies don't, they use Agile, but they don't use Scrum. But it's all very team-driven, and you have small teams where it's self-directed teams. When you have Waterfall, you don't have that, so you have specialties, and inherently you're going to have delays when you hand things off from one person to another person. When you work together as a team, not only is your communication going to be a little bit better and you can divide and conquer a little bit better, but also when a change occurs, the whole team can collaborate on that and come up with a better idea. So the collaborative team environment is definitely one of the benefits of Agile, but the benefits of Waterfall are your teams can specialize. Okay, so I have here benefits of Agile, but I should probably be also talking about benefits of Waterfall. So well suited for less complex and well-defined projects. So if you have a large system with a mobile app and a cloud piece and firmware on a mobile device, and you have all these different components and it's complex and it's doing multiple functions, that might be more appropriate for the Agile method. When you have a less complex system where you have well-defined requirements right up front, maybe that's better for a Waterfall approach. And you can afford to have very specialized team members and hand it off to the next group, because you're not going to make a lot of changes. You're not going to have any surprises. Another benefit of Waterfall is it's easier to manage and control, is one of the statements that are made. But I would argue, for whom? Who is it easier to who's going to have the easier job here? Maybe top management say, this is your responsibility, this is your responsibility, this is your responsibility, and everything's compartmentalized and siloed, and everybody's specialized. But when it's a self-directed team, I need this as a deliverable, this is when I want it by, this is what my backlog is, you guys go do it. And we want to see the first draft of your increments next week, or 2 weeks from now, or 3 weeks from now, whatever the sprint cycle is. I would argue that top management does less managing. It probably is easier to manage, but you have to have a scrum master that's managing that, not managing the team, but coaching the team. So it's not really the same kind of management. It's a much more a much more modern approach to management. So you have to understand how it's controlled. It's controlled by the process that they're using for developing software, and the different feedback mechanisms they're getting give the team the feedback they need so they know when they need to change or when it's okay and when it's done. The other thing that I would say about benefits of waterfall, it's predictable. You have phase gates and you have a date on your Gantt chart, and that's when it's going to happen. But I can also predict, so it is predictable, that you're going to slip on that schedule every single time. Because in reality, there are changes, and waterfall doesn't deal well with the changes, and it causes slipping in the schedule. Agile is more fast and flexible. So if we go back to benefits of Agile, it allows for early delivery of useful product to the stakeholders. So you get a lot of early increments that they can actually use now. You can actually give it to them in a clinical study, and it will work. You can give it to them to gather data. So maybe it's for research purposes only, gathering that big data so we can build an algorithm. Maybe it's a clinical research support tool. It minimizes the risk of rework. We always have a lot of rework in waterfall projects. When we do a test and it fails and we have to go back and fix it and then retest, Agile does smaller testing in smaller increments and gets stakeholder feedback, and there's less large rework projects, and it's fast and flexible. Those are the characteristics of Agile that really give it the benefits. Now let's talk about the failures of Agile. So this is just based on my experience working with a lot of software as medical device development teams where they have problems. The requirements are not well defined. Now, I have one client that they're a software as a medical device company, but they're really a large team. We're talking over 200 people on this team just doing software development. And it's only software, and they've had one product for a very long time, and it's a large product that's complex. They have a lot of very large customers. They sell all over the world in all kinds of markets, and they use an ALM system called Polarian, and they have a test requirements ID number for every single test they have. They have document requirements. They have human factors requirements. Everything has a requirement, and it's all assigned by the computer system, and they have traceability to it, and they make sure it's done. So that's a case where their requirements are not ambiguous in any way. Do all Agile teams have that? Usually not, but you don't normally have 200 people. You have 5, you have 4, something less than 10, certainly, for most of these teams. So I would say that's definitely a difference when you're looking at the failures of Agile. They say you have requirements ambiguity, but it depends on the company and how structured they are in their test requirements. So if there were an improvement I have for people that are using Agile, make sure you do it. Identifying what your test requirements are for each design input or each requirement or each user need, decide what it is and how you're going to test it. What is the acceptance criteria? What is the test method? What is the protocol? Who's going to do it? Do they have independence? So you're not testing your own work. Same thing for the security requirements. They're all requirements. You want to have traceability and what those are in terms of test protocol. Scope creep. So yes, Agile projects have scope creep, but it's a problem from the regulator standpoint because it changed. It may have gone outside of what was originally the plan in a pre-sub. It might have been very different at the end from the predicate 510K that you've got. So it might be a challenge getting it through the regulatory process because it's changed so much. But at the same time, all the changes that should have been made, the customer is okay with because the customer has been involved in those reviews at the end of each sprint. Now, if you modify your sprint reviews a little bit and make sure that you have regulatory involved as a stakeholder giving you feedback, I think you'll have a better outcome on the regulatory side. But that's just making sure that you invite them and get their feedback as a stakeholder. And then we have inadequate or delayed documentation. I think once again, the issue is how do you go about documenting this? But one way to fix it really quick is just to make sure that your documentation requirements, those 12 blue buttons that you have to have in your 510K, make sure they are on the backlog. If you have them on the backlog and you have it detailed what needs to be required, these are more requirements that can be checked off as done as you create them. And it's iterative. You're going to revise them, edit them. They're all drafts until the very end. That's perfectly okay to have a draft that keeps on getting revised. And you just keep on asking the stakeholder, the regulatory person, hey, is this change okay? Is this change okay? Yeah, they're going to look at it over and over again. That's okay. You're doing the same thing with a customer. And the ultimate one is the FDA. So you might decide at certain points, let's get the FDA's feedback on it at this stage in a pre-sub. So that's a way to deal with those failures of Agile. Then we have failures of waterfall as well. So when we're looking at waterfall methods, long development timelines. This is a case for just you have to develop a process for development that is much more flexible and fast. And this is why most of the teams are driven to Agile in the first place. But if you have a simple project and you do a really good job of identifying what those requirements are up front, there's no reason why inherently waterfall has to be longer. I would say the reason why it's longer is because you change it and the system is not designed to handle changes well. If you design your process to handle changes better, you'll be able to absorb those and it won't affect the timeline so much. And probably one of the other problems with waterfall is not being able to handle the changes. So you get to the third or fourth phase of your project, you have a failure in a test, and you have to go back and change your inputs. That becomes very labor intensive if you're doing all the documentation and making sure everything's reviewed and approved before you go on to the next phase. So you might want to rethink what needs to be reviewed and approved. Instead, keep it in draft until you're at the end. And then the testing that you're going to be doing for waterfall, it's performed after the design is finalized. Think of ways you can do some testing that's preliminary testing that'll give you a higher confidence level without a big investment in time and money. And the last piece, limited customer feedback after the requirements phase. Get more customer feedback, get more regulatory feedback. And that goes for both waterfall and Agile. But in particular, that's one of the reasons why you end up creating products with a waterfall process that don't meet the customer's requirements. Now we're going to talk about a couple of risk controls that you can use in general for either method to approve things a lot. So number one, proactive planning. A lot of the clients, whether they're using Agile or they're using Waterfall, what I hear is, I'm not ready to create a design plan or start a design history file because my design isn't done. No, that's not how it works. It's a plan. It says right in the regulations. They were actually intelligent enough back in 1996 to realize we want you to revise and update the plan as the project progresses. They did not say you need to sign it in blood and have it approved by 10 people. Revise and update. Keep it as a draft. Revise and update. That's perfectly fine. Think of it, your backlog is your plan. What a novel idea. And you can revise and update that as you go. Backlog review, backlog pruning of the things that we don't need that anymore. The customer said so. The regulatory person said so. Whoop, they have a new change to the standard. We have to add that in. Proactive planning. Get the feedback from the regulatory and the customer and keep on updating and keep it as a draft. And post-market surveillance, will tell you about cybersecurity issues. It'll tell you about new customer issues, usability issues, all those things. Your post-market surveillance process is supposed to be an input into risk management design, so use it that way. That's a risk control. Number 2, incorporate feedback loops. So it's not just the customer stuff, but it's also the regulatory stuff. But you have other types of feedback loops. Do some preliminary tests that are small and cheap, maybe even like all the security tests that you could do to look that are automated for vulnerability. Do those as you go along. We have AI tools that you can use now to look at the code and look for typical, very common coding mistakes. We used to do code reviews as a team, and it was the most mind-numbing thing on planet Earth to do a code review. Now you can let AI do it for you. So use those feedback loops that are automated in any way that you can, and keep them small and frequent instead of gigantic and painful. Prototyping and mockups. So if you have software in a medical device or you have something that's not software, there's nothing wrong with having prototypes and mockups. If you are developing software as a medical device, you should still have mockups. Some people call them breadboards, but show them a PowerPoint or show them a Miro board or something, some other tool out there that a whiteboard of some kind, so you show them what it will look like. What will the graphic user interface look like? This is into the UX area of it for user interface. Also look at the algorithm. So what kind of controls do we need here? When you're thinking about security, think about your architecture and think about how can we contain the hacker? How can we log the data from the hacker? When you're thinking about authentication and authorization, how can you do this? So think about each module and think about what is the best way to structure that to really give it the kind of look and feel you want and have it work functionally. Test those modules out, prototype them, do some tests, do some mock-ups, see what customers think, see what regulatory thinks, get a cybersecurity firm to give you some feedback on it. Those are really good things to do before you get all the way to the end. So do not wait till the end. Stakeholder interviews and validation techniques. You need simple, cheap, fast ones while you're developing, and then you need a formal final one at the end. I like to think of it the way we do it in usability. Formative testing and summative. The formative testing is small, cheap, fast, frequent, informal. But you still want to document it. Minimal documentation, a lot of automation, a lot of AI tools to help you document that. At the end, the summative ones, it should be 100% chance it's going to pass because you've done so much formative testing to make sure of that. And so it's almost a foregone conclusion, but that's the formal documentation that you're going to submit to the FDA. A little bit more rigorous, a little bit more formal, but it's a foregone conclusion because you did the formative testing that you really needed to do. So do that. Those are the regular check-ins. Those are the reviews that you're going to do. If you have specific milestones that are critical, find out what those are, particularly if you're integrating your software with somebody else's. And then if you have certain things that are going to be critical milestones with a lead time, something that can't be done in more the agile method and has to be done more like the waterfall method, like a pre-sub, you have to build in those buffer times. So the FDA requires 75 days for scheduling these pre-subs. Build that into your schedule. So you're not going to be able to do 100% agile. You have a 75-day cycle for every pre-sub. You're going to have lead times for doing cybersecurity testing because you got to send that out to them and you can't change it in the middle. Your usability testing, you got to send it out and you can't change it in the middle of it. And then the FDA reviews, you can't change it in the middle of it. So all of these have set timelines for review, and that has to be a buffer in your system. So you're going to need a hybrid of agile and waterfall methods when you're combining those two factors. If some things just can't be done the agile way, they have to be done more like the waterfall method because there's a fixed amount of time and you can't change it during that time period. So these are the risk controls you got to kind of think about. Now, here's a couple of extra resources for you here. One of them is the Agile Manifesto. This is really simple. There are 4 things on there. So when you look at the Agile Manifesto, just 4 things. Now, they also have the Agile Principles that goes into more detail, and there are 12 of those. You should look that up. It won't take you any time at all to read through that. But one of the things they have there is, they want you to take these 4 things, and these are more important than these things. One of them is the documentation. They want software that works over documentation. That's where I see all the Agile companies falling apart. They made something that works, but they didn't make it so I can validate it and submit it to the FDA. One without the other is absolutely useless for medical device. So that's the one place you're going to have to deviate from the Agile method because it's required. But you don't want to do any more than you have to. So build those requirements for software documentation into your requirements for done. Those are increments you have to have, and put them in your backlog, and you won't have these problems. And then when you're looking for how do I write a process around this that's a hybrid between the two, look at what your current design and development process is. If it's a waterfall process, whatever it is that you've come up with there, this is our design and development process. Look at scrum.org. Look at the free Scrum guide that tells you how to do this. You will see, if you do a search in the Scrum guide, which you can put into a Word document for free, it's all free. Scrum has like 12 pages. In the Word, software only occurs once. So whether you have a software product or a non-software product, there's no reason why you can't use a hybrid. There's no reason why you can't use Scrum or Agile. There's no reason why you should say that Scrum is not rigorous and structured. It is. So go look at that and learn that before you go saying, I can't do it that way because the FDA says that's a myth. You can do it that way, and there's a lot of structure there that could be stolen shamelessly and put right into your procedure for design and development. So think about that. Now, what I would like you to do after you're done thinking about revising your procedure, I'd like to know where you're at. Put it in the comments below. Vote on this. Are you on the Agile camp? Are you on the Waterfall camp? Or are you on the hybrid camp? And see why. Put it in the comments below. And if you think this would really help your team and you want to get their thoughts and we can improve what we already have written down, share it with your team because this might help them. Like, we never understand how to do this. The regulatory tells us we've always done it wrong. Think about this. Share this with them and then be like, oh, that's so much more sensible. This makes so much clearer. That's my goal, is to make the complex stuff clear. So if we've done that, share it with them. If I've completely botched it, tell me how I've botched it and we'll do this over again. That's the whole concept behind Agile. We get stakeholder feedback and we iterate. So tell me what I've done wrong and I'll fix it and we'll have another round of this. Thank you very much and have a great weekend. Bye-bye.